Hi, this is Totally Got Out of Bed, a podcast that'll support you as you cope with the loss of a loved one to suicide. My name is Tony Plant, and I lost my 15-year-old daughter Anna to suicide on January 30th of 2016.
And I'm Nora Flum. I lost my son Eric to suicide on January 3rd of 2018. If you've been listening to us, you might have heard in our previous episodes we talked about our goals and our ground rules. To sum up, we're just hoping to share some of what has been helpful for us as we learn to live in this devastation. We intend to be descriptive, not prescriptive, meaning that we aren't experts and we're not trying to tell you what to do. Everyone's experience is different, and everyone's grief is different. We just intend to describe our experience in the hopes that you find something that helps you. If you've also been listening to us, you've heard that each of our experiences have been different through the first few days. And now, starting with this episode, episode 6, now that we are finally numbering appropriately, and we're sorry about the misnumbering of the first few episodes, but episode 6 now, um, we're going to talk about getting through the first year. And specifically in this episode, we're going to focus on the mind. How do you wrap your mind around losing someone you love to suicide?
Yeah, it's such a big question. It's something that you never thought you'd have to deal with. And in that first year in particular, I think I know it's all you think about. So many things happen to you that first year, and it affects you in so many different ways. And I think the one thing that haunted me the most was thinking about how she must have felt right before she died. Um, that was like the hardest thing for me to think about. It just felt horrible to me to be her mother and not to have been able to be there and be with her and to be able to save her. And I thought, it just sounds so sad, but I just thought that, you know what, how sad and scared must she have felt at that last moment. And I replay that in my head every day, to this day. I did at first and I still do now. That one hasn't gone away for me anyway. How about you, Nora? What stood out the most for you in those first few weeks?
Oh, yeah, I totally remember being in that point thinking about what must have been in his mind those last few moments. But for me, probably what I remember most about thinking shortly after and through the first few weeks and first few months even is just from the very first moment, my mind just screamed, why? I was desperate to find some sort of reason, some sort of explanation. Why did Eric do this? What happened that made him decide that he didn't want to live anymore? And what if I only called him that morning? What if I had texted him that day to just check in? Why did this happen to him? And why is this happening to us?
Exactly. The why, that was such a big question. It still really is, but no answer anywhere in sight, of course. It's like then there was no answer. There's still no real answer. It's this question that remains in your mind forever and lasts like through eternity.
Right. Learning to live in the why. That I think is one of the first things I had to come to terms with, or one of the most important things I had to come to term with, come to terms with, learning to live in the why. And it is so hard. I mean, maybe some of us have some kind of explanation. Like maybe there was a known mental illness that they struggled with, or there was some sort of triggering event. But even that doesn't explain the death. I mean, some people have mental illness and survive and cope and even thrive in spite of the illness. And lots of people have triggering events like losing a job or losing a significant other or whatever the reason, and they survive. And what makes our situation different? Why did this happen? And knowing that we will never have an adequate answer, at least on this side of life, that's so hard to deal with.
Exactly. That huge why question that remains over our heads. I kept wondering, and I still do, what was it about that particular day that caused her to take her own life? In my brain, I guess, I've compared suicide, like suicide intent, to the straw that broke the camel's back. So, what was that final straw? And this idea that it wasn't maybe one thing that caused her to take her own life, that it was most likely a huge number of things, followed maybe by one or two final straws. And to me, that was sort of comforting to know that whatever I said to her right before she died didn't like cause her death, you know. And I felt like that was really important for me to sort of put it in that parameter, because then it could prove to me that it's not my fault that she died. I didn't just do something that made her die. And it's not your fault either that your person died. In Anna's case, I think it was a million little things adding up on top of each other, and then one or two things on the top of that, and then that camel's back just broke.
Yeah. You mentioned the fault, and I think the fault thing is huge, and it's always present. I remember one of the times we were sitting around with our group, with our survivors loss support group, survivors resources, and this question came up. When you try to answer the why, you start to look for things you should have done or could have done or should not have done, and the possibilities seem limitless. What did I say? What did I do? What should I have said? And I think it's absolutely natural to blame yourself. And I remember when we had this discussion at group, I remember looking around, looking at each one in the room and thinking, it's not your fault. 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 But I remember coming to myself, and I did not have the capacity to say the same thing to myself. I absolutely believed that it was my fault, or at the very least, that there was something I could have done that could have saved him. But
Mm-hmm.
that's not the way I feel all the time. And even now, some 3 years later, sometimes the grief feels overwhelming, and I'm back in that very dark place, certain that if I only were a better mother, or that if I've done something differently, or if I did something more, I should have known. I should have realized, and I could have done something, and I blame myself. But I have to say that that darkness comes less frequently now, and when the grief is a little less raw, I can think more rationally. And on those days, I guess I can accept that it really wasn't my fault, and that it really wasn't anyone's fault. I still struggle with how I could not have known that he was at risk. But an analogy that has worked for me is I think about this. Some people live with a chronic illness that takes them away from us eventually, and we know that it's coming. And some people suffer from a sudden attack that we don't expect, and they leave us without warning. And I think that whatever happened to Eric was something either that he didn't know about or something that he thought he could manage by himself. And he was wrong. And it took him suddenly, without any warnings that we could see.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I feel that that analogy of the illness is so good, Nora. It's like you say, some people get cancer and they die of cancer. Some people get cancer and they recover from cancer. Some people get depression and they recover from it. And some people get depression and they die as a result of it. And I just think that also was really helpful for me as well. And I think that I've mentioned before that one of my coping mechanisms is that I love to read everything I possibly can find about the subject of mental health. And so right after Anna died, I read all the articles I could find, and I read all the books I could find. I even retained some of what I read, although quite a bit of it went in one part of my head and out the other because had such a bad grief brain. But I did usually take notes, and the stuff that was really hit me, are some of the things that I live by till this day. I remember reading, I gathered a lot of theories and philosophies as to why somebody would take their own life. And one of the things I found most comforting is that her brain just wasn't functioning correctly when it happened. Her brain was essentially broken. She had a broken brain. And if your brain is broken, how do you tell it to ask for help? If your arm is broken, your brain tells you to go to the hospital. But if your brain is broken, it's a little different, because the part of your body that should be telling you to go get help is the part that's broken. So once again, for me, that brought me a little bit of peace as well. So she didn't even know how to ask about getting through the pain she was going through because the part of her brain that would do that was broken.
I think, wow, that is really profound because, you know, and that goes to the idea of choice. Is this a choice to take your own life or is it not? And a lot of people think of suicide as a choice, and it's hard not to see it that way. But we have to remember that even if it is a choice, it is a choice that is made by a brain that is not working really well. So it is
Exactly.
important to realize that even if it is a choice, it is not the choice of a rational mind. Um, anyway, so about your idea about reading everything and researching everything, I reacted differently. I have not been able to read anything ever since this happened, and even now, I've not been able to read about it or honestly hardly even talk about it until we started this podcast. I kind of pulled in on myself, and I haven't felt the pull to understand it from an intellectual point of view. It for me still feels too raw and too real. Even now, I have several books that I've been given or that I've bought, but I just can't bring myself to read them. And maybe someday I'll get there, but I'm just not there now.
It's just so interesting. It just, reiterates the fact that everybody's just so different. I mean, and there is no right or wrong. Everybody just gets through it the way they get through it. So it's a really good point. And another thing that stands out for me about the why is that some people ask, why would he or she do this to his or her loved one? Uh, and that hurts anyway because your kid or your person that you love just killed themselves, and now somebody's trying to blame it on them. Like, why would they do that to you? But I learned pretty early in my post-suicide daughter's my post-daughter's suicide research that people who die by suicide are not selfishly taking their own life. People who die by suicide are in extreme pain, and the only thing they can think about is how to stop that pain. It's not about us, the survivors. In that very minute, it's about them and how they can make the pain stop. It reminds me of, has anybody ever heard of Kevin Hines? He's the motivational speaker. But he's the guy who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, and he survived. He's only one of a handful of attempted suicide victims that lived to talk about it. He says that in the minute he jumped, he regretted it. He wished he could change his mind and not jump again. So reading that to me brought me both great sadness, of course, and some amount of relief. It helped me understand and answer the why question. Why? Because she wasn't thinking straight. And it also helped me understand that she probably didn't want to do it. So for some reason that made me feel a little bit better, I guess, on a go forward.
I do remember that story, and I do remember having heard that story before Eric died because I remember when I heard that Eric had fallen or had let himself off the balcony that of his Chicago um, high rise. I remember thinking, I am certain that just like that jumper from the Golden Gate Bridge, I'm certain that the minute he fell, he regretted it. I'm sure he didn't really want to die, and I'm sure that he did not want to hurt us. Whatever he was going through, he just wanted it to stop.
Absolutely. It's the whole idea of that on a good day, Anna wouldn't have taken her own life. I really believe that. And I believe that about Eric as well. But on a bad day, in the middle of the perfect storm, she would. She didn't want to die. She wanted to stop the pain. And she was a victim of suicide. She was a victim of a brain that turned against her and a system couldn't help her. I wish I had written that, but I didn't. But I'm going to say it again because I think it's really profound. She was the victim of suicide, the victim of a brain that turned against her and a system that couldn't help her. I read that somewhere in something which I can't remember,
Of
but it
course,
is
you
a
read it
beautiful
somewhere.
sentiment. Of course I did. Yes, you're absolutely right. But I wish I had written it.
Yeah, The question why is one that we will never have an answer to, and we will never know the reason. I will never know the cause, at least not on this side of life. And one of the ways I got through it is I trained my mind to stop asking the question why and start asking other questions like who's in this with me now, who's helping me get through this, who has gone through this before or something like this before, and who can throw me a lifeline, and who is going to go through this after me that I can help carry along with me in their own trauma and their own pain. I've said before that people call us strong, but it has nothing to do with strength. I'm carried on the prayers and the experiences and the help of others who are helping me cope and who are helping me survive. And I will never be able to tell you why. And the why, the for what reason question will never be answered. But I always knew that at some point I would be able to recognize the for what purpose question. Why can mean for what reason or for what purpose. And I knew that the for what purpose question might be able to be answered someday. And I think that the pain that I've been through can be used for a purpose. And I think that's the reason why a project like this feels important. It helps me feel like my experience can help others feel less alone, less isolated, and that helps. I know that one other thing that I had to learn to do was this, that whenever my mind went to the why question, I had to learn that I had a choice, and I could choose not to follow that thought down the rabbit hole where everything gets warped and nothing is real and everything is frightening and every finger points to me that it was somehow my fault. Instead, whenever my brain went to the why question, I had to find a different thought, a different center. And for me, it centered on prayer. And the prayer that I came back to was one that I learned when I was in college. I was in a religion course, a theology course that studied Eastern Orthodoxy. And Eastern Orthodoxy is not my faith home, but it was someplace I got to visit when I was in college. And I learned the Jesus prayer, which is, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And if that makes you curious, The Way of a Pilgrim is an incredibly important book for me. But for me, that prayer became a safe place to get away from the why question. It just helped me center my thoughts again. It was a mantra that I repeated over and over. So again, one thing I would do whenever my mind went to the why question would be actively choose not to follow it. And for me, instead, I went to prayer. And I know that isn't the answer for everyone. But again, we're not here to be descriptive, or we're here to be descriptive, not prescriptive. So this is not me telling you what you should do. It's describing what worked for me and practicing that skill that every time my mind wanted to go somewhere scary, I practiced redirecting my mind. And it was almost like flexing a muscle. Every time it goes out, come back. Every time it tries to go out, pull it back. And often the center that I came back to was prayer. But honestly, sometimes it was TV, something light, a cooking show, Say Yes to the Dress, Big Bang Theory, or something else like that. Something light, something that would distract me. And sometimes it was coloring, and sometimes it was journaling. But prayer and distraction helped me learn that I didn't have to follow my mind down that rabbit hole where despair lives.
Yep, absolutely. You find, and more for me, it was writing. I did a lot of writing at first, and still I'm back on reading because if I could try to figure out again what might have been going on in her brain, it might make a little more sense to me. And then it was also music. So probably sometime we'll have some sort of an episode on music just because, I think that can be really powerful in your healing process. But you find your own niche, and you kind of at one point nothing really, especially at the beginning, really like solves the problem because your kid's still dead. But on the other hand, there is certain things that you can tell after time sort of take away the anxiety a little bit. But like Nora said, what I need to do anyway was to sort of refocus every time that my mind started going to a bad place, like your fault, all those horrible thoughts you can have about the situation. You just need to bring it back. Kind of reminds me of meditation. when you bring it back to the breath, if we have any meditators out there. So you try to focus on your breath, and if your mind wanders, you bring it back. And that's pretty much exactly the same thing. The one thing that you said about who is going to help you through, Nora, made me think of sort of a meme I saw one time. It was a person at the bottom of a hole, a big, deep hole, and it said something about people will help you get out of that hole if they know that you're in there. So who's going to help you out through this depends, of course, a little bit on who you tell you need help getting out. So part of it lays on us a little bit in that regard. So that's something to keep on in your mind, because if people don't know, they don't know they can help you.
I think that's an important point, and I think one of the things that we'll talk about in an upcoming episode then is how do you tell people what you need? Because getting the help that you need is a significant step, and I'm not even sure that I was able to ask for anything for a very long time. Yeah, a loss to suicide is a trauma like no other, and that trauma affects every aspect of us. So we'll spend a lot of time in the next few episodes talking about getting through that very first year. And I think we all know that one of the hardest things to get through is that first primal scream, why? We don't know how it works, and we don't know how to answer that question for you, but we hope that we've at least been able to share some things that have worked for us. And with that, I think it's time to bring this episode to a close. As always, please, if you or someone you know is in immediate danger, call 911 or go to the nearest emergency room. Or call 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. That's a free confidential crisis hotline that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also text HELLO to 741-741. The crisis text hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week throughout the U.S. The crisis text line serves anyone in any type of emergency. And one new thing I learned this week that I did not know before, some areas are growing in their understanding about how to respond to a mental health crisis. So please check with your local or county health agencies to see if they have a mobile crisis team. Where I live in Anoka County, Minnesota, that telephone number is 763-755-3801. So in your area, search for Mobile Crisis Response Team to see if there is anything like that in your area that could help. And for more information about Totally Got Out of Bed, visit us at totallygotoutofbed.com. That's one word. You can find other episodes there or look for us wherever you get your podcasts. We'd like to hear from you. Please email us at totallygotoutofbed@gmail.com or visit our Facebook page or find us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Thanks. We'd like to thank our extremely talented team. Wendy Wolf, she's our technical guru. Monica Lavorsi, the composer and performer behind our theme song, Hold My Hand Now. And a special thank you to Survivor Resource. That's the group that continues to support us and others in the wake of our tragedies. Thank you for listening today, and please join us for our next episode when we'll talk about the questions, how do I explain how I feel? Learning to tell the story. In the meantime, smile when you can and cry when you have to.
Hold my hand now. Hold my hand now. Hold my hand now and be as one. The colors start to fade. Gray is the only shade that you see now. Lost in the charade of the journeyman's parade, can't see a way out. As you keep marching onward, facts begin to sway. You're in the middle of the fray, so hold on tight now. Your grip begins to slip. You tumble towards the lip of the open chain, and how? But before the world swallows you up, reach out, there's a place to land. Hold my hand now. Hold my hand. Hold my hand now. Hold my hand now. Hold my hand now. Hold my hand now and be as one.